I'm certified financial planner David Somerville, and I'm joined on today's episode by registered retirement consultant Jason Pollock. Jason, good evening. How are you?
Great. How are you? Good to see you
I'm
again.
good. All's great, and we have a pretty neat topic tonight. I want to get into, and the topic is I. Let me go back here. I wrote an article probably about 4 or 5 years ago in a magazine, and it was about a blended family and how a blended family needs a new game plan. And our topic today is yes, a blended family requires a financial game plan. And Jason, if you think about it right now, in 2023, there's a lot of people that have, been happily married. They've gone through separation. They've gone through divorce. Some of the basic stats right now, um, 40% plus of new marriages, which is kind of shocking, right? It's a little bit scary actually, but 40 plus percent of new marriages end in divorce. And a second thought or a second note here is on a second marriage. So you get the person that gets married, 40% plus go through divorce, and then they remarry again. Of second marriages, 60% are actually going through a divorce. And in Canada right now, for every 8 families out there, 1 in 8 families would be classified as a blended family. And I want to get into talking today about, these blended families and how they require a new game plan.
Yeah, what's interesting actually is, most people think of divorced couples, it's the 30-year-olds, the 7-year itch or whatever, 30-year-old, 40-year-old. But how often do we see now 50,
Yeah.
60, even 70-year-olds saying and calling it quits? And then you've got a real problem. Then you've got lots of assets
Oh,
or, that's what we'll be talking about. But then it can become an issue.
yeah, it's a much more complicated process at that point. It's funny in the highlights here, some survey numbers I looked into is if I asked you when do you think most divorces happen, they happen in the first and second year of a new marriage, which is kind
Hmm.
of scary. I mean, imagine that
Wow.
your 2 kids get married, they've been dating for years, you pay a ton of money to have their wedding, and you go through that whole emotional bonding and
Yeah.
welcome to the family, and then within a couple of years they divorce. And
Good luck
this
paying for that wedding.
right?
And then two
So
years later,
yeah,
you,
thanks
yeah,
mom and
yeah,
dad for
thanks.
dropping 40 or 50,000
Yeah,
on it, and
yeah,
we're not happy.
yeah.
We're not going to work out together. And the second big category of the high risk category for divorces is the year 5 to year 8. But Jason, in my article I got thinking a few years ago is it really is a different scenario. When you go into your first marriage, your spouse, you've got kids, you're kind of all in it together. You're learning as you go. But in a second relationship, you've got habits, I've got habits, she has habits. There's a different, I guess, structure in the past, how they tend to do things. And there's 4 areas I want to get into today. Number one, in a blended family, in a new relationship, you want to start thinking about family finances because again, finances are different, right? You want to think about asset ownership. I own this, she owns that. How does it all work together? The third area is going to be wills and estate. Is if I die, I have my kids. Where does the money go? Where do the RSPs go? Where do the assets go? And the fourth portion of the areas to plan around would be creating a family harmony game plan. So just, 4 areas that I think most people aren't thinking about when it comes to the blended family.
For sure. When you talk about family finances, I mean, the first thing is, how do you budget? Planning to do a budget. We see it all too often that, in a new family, you've got one spender and you've got one saver. So how are you going to figure a way of paying the monthly bills? What if one of the husband or the wife makes a lot more money than the other one? So how do you divide up, who pays for what expenses? So it's a really important exercise to go through a monthly budget and determine who's going to be paying for what, because that could, there's something that could lead to divorce.
Well, it's amazing, right? So you think about the budget. I mean, how many people, first of all, do a budget? But
Yeah.
you go back to, the income. So let's say the husband makes 100,000 and the wife makes 50. Well, you would say, okay, he should spend, whatever, 2/3 of his paycheck should go towards part of the expenses, 1/3 of hers should go. But then the husband may have child support. He may have spousal support to his ex-wife. So his income obviously comes down. The wife might be only making 50, but maybe she's getting some child support and maybe she's getting some spousal support. So I think it's important for new families, new relationships, that this is the job of a professional. And I highly recommend to our clients that have gone through a divorce who have now had this new cohabitation with their new spouse or partner. Maybe they're married, maybe they're not just married yet, but they're living together. They're in that relationship. And I always say, let the third party person kind of start to create that conversation, because if that new couple sit down one night at the kitchen table and they have a heavy debate on who should spend what, um, that relationship might
Yeah.
not last, might not
Yeah.
last very
Start off
long.
rocky.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's important that on finances, it's not bad to go get a second opinion. The second part here of a game plan around a blended family, it's asset ownership. So it's a tough one, right? So question, do you keep things separate? So maybe I have $100,000 in an investment and she doesn't have anything, or vice versa. Do at some point you commingle those assets? Does the spouse stay on as the beneficiary? So if I'm in that new relationship and I have RSPs, do I make my new spouse the beneficiary? Do I leave the children? What about the pension? What about the life insurance? And then, of course, there's other asset ownership issues like homes and, again, other investments. So it's a complicated one. What happens if, the husband owns the home and the new wife or the new partner moves into the house? Does the house stay in the husband's name? Is she on title? Did she pay into it? It's a pretty complicated scenario.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what's interesting on the flip side of that, who owns the debt as well?
Right.
I've seen many couples, one person comes into the relationship with quite a large debt. Maybe they've got a
Right.
student debt, credit card debts, that type of thing. Who owns that? Who's going to be paying that off? So it's not just asset ownership, it's who owns the debt as well.
And maybe what's not a bad situation is before you do commingle with your spouse or cohabitate or whatever, maybe you sit down and have a really hard
Yeah,
conversation about this, because when you've got kids involved as well, it's different if you're both single and you both come together. You can kind of create your life together. Your past is your past, but what if one person has two or three kids and the other doesn't have any kids?
right.
And then, of course, they want to have a kid together. It's a complicated scenario.
For
So,
sure.
again, asset ownership is one of the two big things you have to think about when it comes to a blended family.
Sure. And you had mentioned it earlier, the wills and estates. This is another hot button topic. What happens when one person dies? What happens to the house if they owned it before? What happens to the debt? What happens to the kids? Does the new spouse get X amount of percentage and the kids get the rest? Again, we see it a lot. And it's not an easy topic to bring up, but it's something that you should get out of the way early. This is what I want my kids to have. This is what I want these kids to have, and work backwards on it.
Well, it's funny on the house is, does the spouse or the new partner come in and do you equalize the house?
Yeah.
That's a big decision. And again, one of the things I find that when I talk to clients is, so let's say the wife owned the house and has two kids and the husband moves into the house. If the wife passes away and if the husband comes in with two kids of his own and they spend 2 or 3 years in that home together, that becomes more or less the matrimonial home. But if the wife happens to pass away, it was her home. Where does the husband go, or vice versa? So house is big. I will say one thing: when it comes to wills and estates, one of the easiest ways to put the spouse at ease is to buy life insurance.
Yeah.
And we had a client years ago. He had significant wealth. She didn't have significant wealth. And, but again, she was coming into this new relationship and living in a beautiful home, having some luxury products and having some abundance. And she said, I wanted to go to your kids if you die, but I also need to know that I'm going to be okay and I can continue on because I'm forfeiting and moving into your location. And I said to him, I said, why don't we just buy $1 million life
Yeah.
insurance policy for $200 or $300 a month? He was in his 50s. I said, it's a low cost plan. If something happens, it goes to your new beloved wife. She has $1 million of working capital. She can go figure out her life. So life insurance, Jason, is a big thing. And the fourth thing here on the on building a game plan for a blended family is having a harmony plan. And I talk about this is really think things out. Start talking about the wills, obviously. Start talking about the insurance, but really get the kids involved. And I think the one issue, the one area that I think people forget about is the kids might not speak up and talk about this, but they're worrying about
Yeah.
this. okay, mom and dad are separated, they're divorced, dad's moving in with this new person, she has two kids, we're two kids. How does that family harmony work? What happens if she dies? What happens if he dies? Like what happens here? So I think it's important that parents owe it to the children, if they're of appropriate ages, to sit down and really talk through the scenario and let them know that it's going to be great if we're together. It'll be great if it doesn't work out. And hopefully, too, from my experience, is that what you don't want to do is rush into a new cohabitation. You want to make sure that when you're bringing kids into the mix, that everybody's prepared to come in and it's the right time, it's the right place, it's the right location. And Jason, for all of our listeners out there and our viewers, we have a program in our practice we've created, and it talks about these critical areas. It's called the Blended Family Game Plan, and again, it's a worthy hour and a half of your time to come in, have a conversation with us about this. Let us look at this from a game plan and a financial perspective. Let us build a roadmap. And then what happens is people walk away from the table after a meeting or two, and they feel empowered about the state that they're in.
Yeah, at very least, it opens up the conversation, and it's better to have it early on rather than later when you're, like you said, when you're living together and the families are blended together. Better to get it out of the way early.
Exactly. Jason Pollock, again, thanks again for
Thank
showing
you
up.
for
Really
having me.
appreciate it.